Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Kenny, and we are going to be talking about the last 5 chapters of Return of Condor Heroes. So, we're going to get right into it in a moment, but, this is basically the part of the story where everything sort of comes together, and then you eventually have the final battle at Zhangyang, and then, the last chapter with the new summit at Mount Hua. So why don't we get right into chapter 36? This is chapter 36, the birthday celebration. In this chapter, a contest is held to determine who the new beggar chief will be. But when it seems that Yellow Chi, Guafu's husband, is selected, an unusual beggar named He Shiwo, who nobody really seems to recognize all that well, disputes his victory and questions his lineage. And also in this chapter, Big Headed Ghost and Divine Eagle sort of join up with Guoshang and go to watch the contest at the stage with her. And it's at this point that they present 3 gifts to her from Yangua. The first being a bag of ears that came from a bunch of dead Mongolian soldiers that had been dispatched to 2 towns that are a day away. The second is the blowing up of this munitions that's really important for, I think, where is it? In Nanyang? Is that where they blew up the munitions?
I don't recall, but yeah, it was somewhere relatively close by. I guess it was where the main supply base of the invading Mongolian army was. And I think this was so they actually built a city within the 16 years because the siege of Shangyang was just taking that long.
Yeah, yeah.
And they actually built a city from scratch and used it as a supply depot, to support them in the war there.
And then the third gift is D'Urba in a bag to issue punishment to it's revealed that he Shiwo is actually Huodu, and so revenge for Chief Lu's death, because Yanguan knows that Chief Lu was important to Guoshang. So
I actually think it's more. So the third gift to me is probably the actual dog beating stick because he presents it to her first.
okay, that's fair.
Um,
All right, no, I think
yeah, so I mean, I think the Angor found out that Hershey War has the dog beating stick hidden inside, and that's why he sort of
yeah, he's got it.
unmasks him and
He's got it concealed in his staff, and
yeah.
he's been just disguised so that he can evade his disgrace for all these years. So he's basically pretending to be a beggar, and I guess his plan is to take over Beggar Sect. That's his goal, and he's going to just pretend to be this ugly guy with the dog beating stick hidden in his staff, and then I don't know. I guess that was going to be the ace up his sleeve so that he could claim to be the
Yeah,
leader.
because I think so when he was questioning Yeluchi, like saying his lineage is not correct and that he's not, and that he hasn't avenged the previous chief and that he hasn't got the dog beating stick, he's not worthy. So I think clearly his plan then was to somehow frame the murder of of the previous of Chief Lu, was it? Sorry,
Yeah, Chief Lu, I think it was.
Chief Lu, and also coincidentally find the dog beating stick and use that as sort of ammunition to get himself propelled up the ranks to the clan chief position.
And so I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on this chapter in particular? Anything that stuck out at you as important or unusual?
I wouldn't say I really enjoyed this chapter actually because the free gifts that Yang Guo gives were pretty extravagant as far as presents for a 16-year-old girl goes, I'd say.
It's a pretty dramatic gesture, I would say, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I do like how Huang Rong is like really suspicious of what the hell is going on about everything. Like she's overthinking everything so much, and like even when she sort of finds out that is this not they don't find that Yang Guo doesn't show up this chapter, does he?
I think he shows up technically next chapter, but I think
Next chapter, yeah,
Huang Rong has kind of figured out the
yeah,
connections.
the Eagle
And
Hero
yeah,
probably, and
and
yeah.
I think she's very. I mean, it's like you're saying. Her wits become a double edged sword for her at times, and so here well, I think within I think it's a reasonable thing to be concerned about. Her daughter, who's like what 16, is infatuated with this eagle hero, and and she's a little suspicious of, like she hasn't seen Yango in all these years. At this point, you feel like she should understand that Yangor is not gonna is a righteous person, but she's still kind of worried about him freaking out when he finds out that Xiaolong Nu isn't is maybe not with the Divine Nun, and she's also concerned that he's maybe trying to put the moves on her daughter. So she's not sure that it's 100% innocent relationship.
Yeah, and adding to that, like the fact that he brought so many not sketchy, but people of questionable standing in the martial world, and introduced them to her daughter. I mean, like there was the whole bunch of people who were introduced like last chapter when they were having a mini banquet in Guo Shang's bedroom, and and all of these people bringing like ears and stuff, and it was a bit. I think she's right to be suspicious.
Yeah, I would agree, and I apologize for that. I forgot to turn my phone off. So I'm sorry. Go on.
Yeah, and yeah, it's fine for her to be suspicious, but not necessarily in the way that she is. Like she's thinking that Yang Guo's got some weird reverse honeypot plan going on there, trying to.
I love that the thing that really moves Guo Zhang about Yango is that he's like waiting for Xiaolong Nu all these years, and Huang Rong just thinks it's some trick to.
Well, she doesn't know that that Yang Guo has told Guo Shang everything about him and Xiao Nu, and even when she finds out, she thinks, "Oh, that must be part of his plan."
Yeah.
And she's like she's overprotective of her daughter, but at the same time, like she's overthinking it really hard. I mean, I think that's fine actually. That's a good character flaw to have because otherwise, like Huang Rong is depicted as this person who's like excellent at martial arts and got the wits of Zhuge Liang, right? The female Zhuge Liang is her nickname for a couple of chapters ago, as mentioned. And it's good that she has the flaw in that she is overprotective and she thinks things, or she overthinks things and draws incorrect conclusions because she's too confident in her own smarts, basically.
No, definitely, and again, I mean, it makes sense also with her background with her father. He's definitely, I mean, she grew up with like the, like the embodiment of a riddle almost, and so it's, I think that just her whole character makes sense in the way that it's a sort of a double-sided coin. I think works and it fits a lot of the themes of the story where part of the whole point of her and Guo Jing being together is they complete each other, and I think that. The idea being that there's sort of this thing about maybe intelligence not necessarily being the be all end all of being a complete person, and so I also thought that it was interesting that speaking of the father that they mentioned here that she hasn't seen her dad in like 10 years. Which I thought was pretty interesting. Like Huang Yaoxi is just like he's just like I'm sort of feeling bad for Huang Rong because this has been her problem since the first book where her dad she just really doesn't spend much time with her at all.
Well, it's not like he doesn't care about her though. I think it's just one of those weird things where the father's not supposed to have much, like it's supposed to be the mother's job to look after the children and the father is supposed to be aloof and
true, but her mother died, so
so she was left with no one to look after her and her father was being all mysterious and aloof and studying the ways of the trigrams and Taoism or whatever
he's
mystical
like the
magic
Steven
things.
Tyler of the martial world. He just kind of he sort of swoops in and swoops out as he wishes. But he lives a fabulous life,
because if we go by I haven't read the novel, Legend of Condor Heroes, but if it's anything like the Brave Archer movies, then like he obviously cares a lot for her and will like do anything to keep her safe and like and will go out of his way to try and find her if he knows that she's in danger. But unless anything happens, then he's sort of like, yeah, whatever, she can do what she wants.
I think he keeps tabs on her.
Yeah,
and he definitely knows what's going on. Even in this book, you see like he shows up and kind of saves the day. When he feels his presence is needed. It's just that it's very rare for him. He'd be content to not show up and say anything. It seems. And so I guess getting into chapter 37, which is Gratitudes and Grudges Over 3 Generations. In this chapter, we have the battle between D'Urba and Huodu, I'm sorry, Hishiwu, because we don't quite know the everything about him yet, I think. And then D'Urba smashes him with a rod, and he collapses. And then they spare D'Urba. Oh, wait, I think does Yanguo and Huang Yaoshi arrive.
Yep.
And before D'Urba gets spared, because D'Urba smashes Hishiwo / Hoodoo with a rod, makes him collapse, and then I forget who walks up to him. I think it's Yellow. No, somebody is going to walk up to him to sort of check if he's dead. Maybe it's Guo Fu, and then they use Divine Finger Flick to kill Huodu for good.
Yeah, because Hordy was pretending to be dead, and well, it wasn't. It was like on his last breath, and he was thinking he could take D'Urba with him. But yeah, I think it was probably Guo Shang or Guo Fu or someone. Like I think it was one of the females who was coming close to try and examine the corpse when Hordo basically launches his last hurrah at them and is saved by Wang Yaoshi and Yang Guo at the same time, using the same technique.
And then
and then they both sort of float down from like a 60-foot pole or whatever.
And then D'Urba is spared, but he has to agree not to come to the Central Plains again. And then Yanguo and Huang Yaoshi arrive, and then they depart together. And they even have like a nice little one-liner as I forget what they say. Like, we don't like to be constrained. Like, basically, don't, just leave us alone. And however, Guoshang learns a little bit more about Yanguo right after he leaves, and she's concerned that he's going to learn that Divine Nun doesn't exist, and so she goes after him to prevent him from committing suicide, which is what she thinks he's going to do. And as she's trying to find him, she bumps into Jin Lun, who just says he's some monk. And he says, "Oh yeah, I'll take you to her." And then they bump into Big-Headed Ghost and Long-Bearded Ghost, and Jinlun just kills them for their horses. And Guoshang feels hatred for the first time and is basically abducted by Jinlun at this point. And then
not for the first time either.
No, not for the no. She's a very forgiving character. And then at a tea house with Huang Yaoshi, Yanguo learns that Divine Nun might not exist, and so he goes to Iron Spear Temple to lay his father's bones to rest. And there he sees Skyflying Bat, Kei Jena, who's dealing with these guys that are all shackled together that used to be prisoners at Chongyang Palace, and he's supposed to be bringing them the 9-flowered dew pills. And there he learns from Skyflying Bat sort of the full history of his father, and he erects a new headstone to his dad, and then he goes to search for Guoshang in the Mongolian camp because he learned from Skyflying Bat that she was missing, and when he doesn't find her, he then goes to Passionless Valley for his appointment with Zhao Longnu. And so I don't know. Any thoughts on this chapter? This chapter had kind of a lot of meat to it, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting how coincidental it was that when Yang Guo goes to the Iron Spear Temple, it's just when Skyfang Bat and those prisoners were there. The people who knew the truth about the incident were able to actually explain it to him.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of really coincidental stuff in this whole series. People just kind of
in the genre,
yeah.
I guess, as well. It's part of the charm, and you say as if that's going to happen, but I'll suspend disbelief just because it's cool.
Well, and you know what? The thing that ends up working well about it is once you don't worry about that, it's all fine. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's one of these things that sometimes maybe we get too hung up on. Like, like the character walks out of their house and they meet who they need to meet in order for the next thing to happen. But yeah, no, that I like when he goes to the Iron Spear Temple again, and number one, he sees the grave of his father, and the headstone reads, "Unfilial disciple Yang Kang's grave, inscribed by useless teacher Tui Chuji." So it's sort of like just this further insults on his dad's name, and he still doesn't quite know the whole story. But then he sees Kei Jena and the Shackle brothers, and he talks to Kei Jena, and I thought this was a great moment for Kei Jena, who's really just sort of like so unafraid of Yango's reaction. He's just like, "I'm going to tell you everything there is about your father," and he just doesn't care. Yango is initially mad, but then when he realizes the guy is just being honest, he's actually a little bit thankful. And this is the first time that anybody's really given him the full story. He's always gotten vague details, like your father. I think the most he's really gotten is, "Oh, your father recognized a villain as his dad." Which is
Guo Jing talking about it.
Yeah, which is like, what's that supposed to mean? Like that's it doesn't really give him a whole lot of clarity, and so he finally, I think, realizes just how bad his dad was, and he erects a new headstone that reads, "My father, Lord Yang Kang's grave by his unfilial son Yang Guo," which is, I think, kind of a really clever approach, because. And it obviously pleases Kei Jena, who says, "Well, yeah, I guess if you're gonna be unfilial, like that's the father to be unfilial to," was sort of how I was reading it. So it was I don't know. I thought it was a nice way to wrap that up. But we also learned some interesting things about Jin Lun this chapter. We learned, number one, that he can cry at will.
His acting skills have improved to another level. Like he's always done this thing of like pretending to sort of be a good person, doesn't he? Like I think he's done it in the past as well. Like he's fooled people into thinking that, oh, he's a decent person and he's not going to do anything bad, but he always just ends up like being a villain like shortly afterwards, and people are always surprised like, oh.
Well, he's a monk, so he's probably got to learn how to play that game, because he's supposed to walk around not killing people and stuff, and he just clearly is not hung up on that.
I don't know. Do Tibetan monks subscribe to that philosophy?
So. I think so. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm not up to date 100% on Tibetan Buddhism, but I would assume that it doesn't deviate that much from.
Probably not.
But we also learned that he's broken through the 10th level of. I think they call it different things, different points in the book, but I think it was like the dragon elephant moving skill or something like that. But I like that they quantify
the idea that you could almost move an elephant with his kicks and stuff, right?
So he's got some really serious kung fu chops at this point, and that's important because he wants to pass his kung fu on to somebody, and he can't. He's a monk, and so he has no children, and D'Urba is is sort of useless anyways, but is now sort of not going to be even returning to the Central Plains.
Well, he was a prisoner for all those years.
I'm sorry.
D'Urba was a prisoner for all the past 16 years basically, because he was captured after Hordo's betrayal.
And
Hordo was obviously now dead.
Yep. And Hordo does he know that Hordo's dead at this point, or is that because that just happened, right?
That just happened, so I think he's probably not aware yet.
But he basically just the guy betrayed him, so he doesn't want anything to do with him anyways. And so he just lamenting that like his first disciple is dead, is D'Urba's kind of just not he's okay, but he's sort of a simpleton, and Hudu is just not a good person, and so he begins thinking of the idea of making Guoxiang his disciple. And the thing that's interesting is the things about her that are impressing him are her good like her
the qualities that he himself does not have.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's, and when we get to the chapter that deals with the finale, we'll get to sort of why that's important. But yeah. So I don't know. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else of note in this chapter that we should be talking about.
Well, I think the main thing was Yangor finding out about his father, the truth about his father, and sort of making peace with that, and putting a new headstone in place. Um, Other than that, I think and also finding out about Shallow Nu not following the divine number. We've already spoken about that.
Which brings us to the next chapter, which is chapter 38, Life and Death Are Boundless. And in this one, everybody basically kind of goes back to Passionless Valley, to where Xiaolong Nu might have jumped off that cliff. Uh, we have Jin Lun has still got Guo Zhang, and she convinces him to go to Passionless Valley, basically by taunting him that he can't beat Yanguo, and she knows where Yanguo is going to be, and so they agree to go there. And this is also the chapter we learn that he really wants to pass on his kung fu, and that he really wants Guo Zhang to be his disciple, and she refuses. We also follow Huang Rong, and she eventually finds Zhu Batong and Reverend Rideng and Yinggu, and she learns that they've all become beekeepers, but she finds some of Xiaolong Nu's bees, and they've got messages tattooed on their wings that say,
Yeah,
I'm at the bottom of Passionless Valley. And
in pieces, like over several bees as well. I think it was.
well, because it's their very tiny little wings.
It's a bee.
Yeah. There's all kinds of issues with that plot device, but I think it's like a really sort of interesting, elaborate thing that could only happen in a story like this. And so everybody decides to go to Passionless Valley, and Yanguo gets there, and he ends up jumping into the gorge, and Guo Zhang arrives just as he's doing that, and she follows, and Reverend Jin Lun tries to grab her, but I think he uses like his golden hooks or something, and he just barely holds on, and then her clothing, like a little piece of her gown or something, rips off into his hands, and she falls in, and that's when all the other heroes arrive, and they just think that he must have killed her. And so there's a big fight with Jin Lun. One of the eagles swoops down and brings Guo Zhang back up, and she tells them that Yanguo is down at the bottom of the gorge, and they decide to go into the gorge after they've frozen Jin Lun's acupoints. But while they're in the gorge looking for Yanguo, she's tricked by Jin Lun, who pretends to be in considerable pain, and he convinces her to tap a couple of his acupoints, and he grabs her and flees. And
Yeah, that turns out he can shift his acupoints not at will, but like just slightly to the point, slightly enough that he can sort of make her tap the wrong acupoint just by tensing or whatever he's doing there.
And I think we got a glimpse of that in the previous chapter too, because I think Guo Zhang tried to freeze his acupoints and it didn't succeed.
Oh yeah, it's when they were asleep, or when he was sleeping. She tried to tap his acupoints and then run away, but somehow Jin Lun was in front of her, sleeping on a tree, when she thought she'd finally gotten free of him.
Yep. Yeah, he did this weird. Yeah, it was a very odd thing where she keeps trying to run away, and he's just like sleeping in the road and just hanging. It's a very sort of surreal kind of martial master is coming to get you. I don't know. What did you think of this chapter? Any thoughts on it?
I thought the bee thing was pretty cool, to be fair.
Yeah, I thought the bee thing was really interesting.
It was clever, like you said, it's completely impractical, and you have to suspend disbelief a little bit to make it work. But the concept itself was pretty funky, and I like the fact that Del Botton, after all these years, is still like having fun with bees.
Yeah, no, it works with his character. I can really picture him as a beekeeper, and I like that the messages on the, like, I think he even knew that they had characters on them, but he never pieced them together, right? Like that.
He never cared, I guess. Like, it was just like, oh, that's funny, and then go back. And I do like the fact that Yideng and Yinggu and Double Tongue are now all living together at this can't remember the name of the valley now, like Hundred Flower Valley or whatever it was.
I can't remember, but they got it, it's almost like a Winnie the Pooh type situation. Like, it's just like a nice little idyllic homestead, it seems,
Yeah,
where they're
with plenty of flowers and bees and stuff.
it's
Yeah,
very charming, and I think it's a nice place for them to retire as
yeah.
and set aside any grudges that might exist. So yeah, it's a nice it gives closure to those characters.
Yeah, and
Um,
I guess another thing is like by this point we can already sort of guess who's tattooed that stuff on the bees, given that we know who can control the bees and who rears them, right? So
oh,
it's not a spoiler if I say that it's Xiaolong Lu's tattooing the bees with her
oh,
location. But my question is like, so I'm trying to. We'll probably talk about it a bit more when we get onto the next part. Is how did the bees? How did she rear the bees? How did they fly out? I thought she was at the bottom of like a cliff and in a tunnel, like sort of like how you have it behind the waterfall type things.
yeah,
That's what I'm sort of visualizing, like a weird sealed off cavern.
yeah.
But maybe I'm a
I've always been a little unclear on exactly what the geography is there and what the hurdles are to leaving, because at one point they describe it like, well, to get there you have to dive down from the top so that the
yeah.
force can get you, because it's a really deep lake and you have to get really far down so you can get into that cave. But I could have sworn they said there were like the bees were all outside of the lake.
Yeah.
So and so I don't know. I'm not 100% certain, but and also I'm wondering, bees don't have a very long life, so this
Yeah,
species
I
of
was also
bees.
thinking like their range as well, their flight range. Like, how far away is Passionless Valley supposed to be from the Hundred Flower Valley?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming it's at least days. It's got to be at least that length of time,
Days,
if
yeah.
not more.
And bees don't range days away from their hive, do they? So it's
But
one of those things where,
I
go.
will say they do mention this is a unique species of bees. So
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
I guess the you know it's everything's wide open.
Well, I mean, this is a species of bees with the poison that is lethal, and also the honey that is like an elixir that cures all poisons.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot going on with these
This
bees.
is like Deus Ex bee, basically.
But then we get to the big battle at the end. This is so like after Jinlun takes Guozhang, the heroes start looking for a while, but they return to Zhangyang because the Mongols attack, and here we have the Mongol attack being led by Monkey Khan himself, and during the fight, there's this glorious scene where Huang Rong and Guo Jing are sort of up on the wall of the city, and they're just overlooking the battle and commanding from there, and during the battle, the Khan is forced to retreat, and then they erect that tower with the dried grass on it, and everybody discovers that Guozhang is on top, and Jin Lun is before it, threatening to burn the tower. And it's sort of this very dramatic sequence where the heroes they go out to save her, but there's initially Guo Jing is very just let her burn, he doesn't want to give in to the enemy's tactics. And Huang Yaoshi ends up doing this really cool 28 star formation thing that requires all five masters and like each one commanding 8,000 soldiers who are sort of representing one of the five elements, and it's really elaborate. It's a really elaborate battle tactic, which we'll get into when we talk about the chapter in depth. But during this sequence is when there's sort of like I guess a flashback or something where they go back to the scene with Yangor at the bottom of the gorge, and you see that how he is how he and Guozhang meet each other there, and he tries to help her get when she gets really cold from being in the lake, and so he tries to help her recirculate her chi, and then the eagle takes her up. But then we learn more about what happens to Yangor and why he wasn't at the bottom of the gorge. He goes to a deep cavern beneath the lake, and there he finds something that looks a lot like the ancient tomb that he used to live in, and he reunites with Xiao Longnu, who's been in there for 16 years, and it turns out she was cured by a combination of fish, jade honey, and cold, and so then they decide to go and deal with the world for a little while, and and so there's a big finale at Zhangyang where eventually Yang Guo and Zhao Longnu return for the fight, and there's an interesting moment at the battle where we have different versions of the book. Like there's been three different editions, and each edition kind of deals with this one crucial plot point differently. And the plot point is exactly how Guozhang is saved from that tower. In one of the versions, Yang Guo and Zhu Batong save her, but in the third edition, Jin Lun sacrifices himself in order to save her, and she becomes he asks her to call him master, and she calls him master twice, and he dies. And at the end of the chapter, Yang Guo kills the Khan with I think he throws a stone at him, and
Yep.
then the heroes all agree to go to Mount Hua, and so I don't know. What did you think of this chapter? This is like the big chapter.
It is the big chapter. It's the closing of many plot points and wraps it up quite nicely, actually. I think it's still a bit iffy that Yang Guo manages to kill the Khan. It's one of those things where it's like, well, it's not. It doesn't seem likely that a martial hero can charge his way through thousands of Mongol soldiers and then throw a rock at a Khan and kill him. but,
But if anybody can do it, I would say Yang Guo is one of the few people that could.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I do like though that you get a real sense of the math involved, like a real sense of like one martial hero is like the equivalent of this many soldiers in the setting, and you also realize like the martial heroes, they're kind of like tanks. They're like tanks and generals combined in these scenarios, and while having 14 martial heroes, it still isn't enough. Like an army still matters. It can like one martial hero can is like the equivalent of like 400 men. Do you know what I mean? Like one really good martial hero is a substantial force, and so you just get the sense that there's an internal logic to how these battles are playing out.
I
But
do I do sort of find it interesting that the formations that Huang Yaoshi was using needed to have like five, strong martial heroes or people who are skilled in martial arts at least, to be a leader.
no, what was so cool about that was it was like he was blending martial arts and battle tactics and traditional soldiery. So it's like he was bringing sort of like a martial hero's understanding of fighting and then applying it to the battlefield. And then
Yeah,
it's just this glorious thing where like the guy like they're representing the five elements. The guys who represent fire have like flamethrowers and are like primitive flamethrowers, but they were described as like flamethrowers. And Huang Rong is leading the division that represents water, and she's spraying poison at people with hoses, and it's really epic. Like you just picture this massive sort of like Taoist what's it called, the Bagua, is that the name of it?
I think this one is like Chiman Dunjia, right? It's the one that they mentioned a lot. It's all about the life and death gates, basically, which kind of is just a Bagua, I guess. Yeah.
But and I don't know enough about it to sort of conjure up the visual image, but I just have this image of sort of this symbology being used on and sort of becoming like I see shapes on the battlefield like that are meant to reflect these principles, and just I don't know the vision of like just the spraying poison with hoses and having massive jets of fire is but and being led by these legendary heroes that we've been following for these two books is great.
And supposedly, using flamethrowers and stuff, and this sort of formation stuff was all sort of originated from the Three Kingdom period, where Zhuge Liang was rumored to be able to do that sort of stuff. Right, he had his war machines which could spew fire, and he used like rock formations to mislead entire armies and stuff, right?
Well, and I've seen like reconstructions of what those sort of technologies might have been like. And I don't know how accurate it is, but they look super cool when you see them. Like
Yeah, they do.
it's fascinating to think that.
I imagine it's a bit like a bit of artist liberalness going into that.
Maybe one of these days we'll do like a technology edition of the podcast, but there's again, I'm not as I'm not a I don't know a whole lot about what do they call it, physical culture, but I think that just the stuff that I've seen has really been surprising sometimes, and so that's what it was in my head when I'm picturing the flamethrowers. I'm picturing these things that I've seen sort of woodcut images of. And I don't know, it was a super cool scene, I thought. And I also thought it was great to have Wang Yaoshi in that role. Like, that was a perfect moment.
It makes perfect sense. Like, he spent all these years sort of studying obscure things. Like, that was not that was magic, but it essentially amounts to like numerology, astrology, that type of stuff, and this is his moment to shine. Like he studied the. So it was also interesting to note that he was inspired by the 7-star formation that the Wudan people were using.
Quan Zhen sect,
yeah,
right?
Shenzhen, yeah. um, and as a result of seeing how well they sort of put the formation together, it inspired him to use 28 stars this time.
Yeah, you can sort of see you can imagine his wheels turning on that one.
Yeah.
There's a and also there's a couple other things I want to talk about. I don't want to forget either of them, but the first one is just that we have the whole reunion with Yangor and Jiaolong Nu, so that's obviously important.
Oh yeah,
and we learned that she like hasn't aged at all, and he's got like gray hair and looks he looks older. The grief from the separation has aged him, and she's been sort of just living in like a cold cave and preserving her youth this whole time. So
and it's not unfounded, because we were told at the very beginning that her the Jade Maiden Heart Sutra that she practices, it was all about the suppression of emotion, and according to her master's theories was that emotion was what causes one to age, and as long as you show no emotion, then you don't age. I mean, which sort of makes sense to me. I mean, like, even in real life, if you tell someone that it's someone who's not stressed and who is perfectly like sort of zen with life, they don't tend to like show much signs of aging, right? They won't have as many wrinkles because they're not frowning as much or whatever.
Well, that's what I've always heard. I've always heard like if you like smile a lot, like you'll get like like the lines will sort of. I don't know anything about
crow's feet and stuff like.
Yeah.
So what women fear.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that's the actual cause of them or not. But I mean, that's what I've always heard from people. So it seems like a fair bit of.
If your face doesn't move, then you'll never age.
Yeah. So if you just keep perfectly still, I mean, it's an interesting idea, and it definitely works in the context of the story. And she's got like a whole practice that it's not just like, oh, don't smile. It's like a philosophy that she's supposed to live by, and that's kind of how she passes the time in the cave, is my impression.
And plus, she also has like all this nutritious stuff that she's eating, like fresh fish from an untainted, clean water source, and like honey as well. Like honey is supposed to be good for complexion, right?
Well, and I think there's definitely something to the fish, because we have a community around here that was a fishing community, and they used to always observe that the children from this community were super healthy, and they think it was because of the heavy fish diet. So
fish is all the omega-3 oils and stuff, right? So not going into the science of her diet or whatever, but to me it makes sense that she doesn't age as much, because I think she's probably takes better care of herself than Yang Guo did throughout the 16 years. To be honest, he was living with an eagle and like throwing himself into a salty sea. Now that's another thing as well. Like, he was drenching himself in seawater day on day much of the 16 years. I can't imagine what sort of damage that would have done to his hair.
Well, and just the arthritis from all the action he's seen, like he's been living a very self-destructive lifestyle, and it seems like she's been kind of just basically living peacefully in this cave without any stresses from other people or any. So she's just kind of been living a calm life, and and slowly curing herself, obviously, which again we learned was the jade honeybee, the fish, and the cold. So she ended up right exactly where she needed to be in order to be cured. But there was an interesting comment that she made where if he had just gone to the gorge and simply wept because she wasn't there and then went home, rather than dived into the gorge and tried to commit suicide, they never would have been reunited. So
Yeah, because they were saying that only because Yang Guo dived down did he go deep enough into the lake to see that there was an entrance way somewhere else, like a light or whatever on the other end, which prompted him to try and dive down and swim. Because otherwise, I think the water pressure or whatever and the coldness of the water would have dissuaded anyone else from trying to explore it already. I think that was mentioned by Huang Rong, right, who tried to swim in the water and she couldn't.
Yeah, she tried to go in and she couldn't do it because it was too cold and she couldn't get deep enough. And it was his diving in there that like led him to realize how, that he could get into that cave. But yeah, so I don't know. I thought that was it was a cool reunion.
And I thought it was cool. I actually also answered the question on why she chose 16 years. Like, yeah, I know that Huang Rong made the stupid excuse that the nun only comes to the mainland once every 16 years. But yeah, I liked Shadow News' logic that 8 years might not have been enough for Yang Guo to forget her, so she chose 16.
And it still wasn't enough.
No, it wasn't enough. I mean, I guess she underestimated just how much Yang Guo loved her. And it's kind of interesting why she chose things that are multiples of 8. I guess 8 is also one of those numbers which is quite prevalent in Taoism. And
do I wonder what 8 represents? Is there a
well, you say the Bagua. There's the 8 directions, the 8 trigrams.
But does it have a specific meaning itself, or
no? It's just one because it's just one of the numbers that shows up quite often in literature, I think.
Yeah, no, because it was 8 and then 16, but yeah, I don't know. I liked the reunion. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, just because I'm afraid we're gonna forget it, is the different versions of the ending, and Jin Lun's death, and sort of. I don't know. Number one, which one did you prefer? Because in the earlier editions, I guess he doesn't behave selflessly towards Guoshang, and in the third edition, he kind of gets a moment of redemption before he dies, and he sacrifices himself.
I don't know. Like I found myself thinking about that quite a lot, and I'm not really sure because on one hand, like I like people trying to redeem themselves, but on the other hand, it's like, is it necessary for him to be like? I mean, why can't evil people just be evil at the end of the day, right? Do they need to have that much of like a deep sort of conflict within themselves of between like whether they should be good or evil? Can they not just be greedy and self-serving? And that's why I would be happy with either ending. I'll probably just say like since the author decided to change it to in the third edition to him being selfless, and that's fine by me. But if they had kept it as the original with him being selfish and then ultimately getting caught up in the falling tower, that would have also been fine by me.
Well, and I don't know how much I would say it's like a full redemption. It's more, I guess they could have just like you're sort of right. Like he could have just died the same way Hudu died, and it would have been fine. He's a perfectly serviceable villain. There's no reason to sort of make him a good guy all of a sudden. And sometimes I think it's a bit cheesy when they have those redemptive arcs, like, out of nowhere. I think with his character where it works, and again, I don't know how much of this is the different editions warring, because I don't know how much of this stuff, like, we don't know exactly how many of these seeds were also added in the revision process that we were reading. But I liked how it tied with his loss of disciples and his desire to have his kung fu live beyond himself. And so it was this, it seemed like a natural outgrowth of that, and it seemed like a natural outgrowth of his connection with Guoshang, but I don't know that it necessarily meant anything beyond his relationship with her. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that he was going to do that for anybody else in that moment. I think it was just that one character who he had developed an attachment to. So to me, it's almost more than a redemptive arc. It just is sort of more of like a character rounding arc. It kind of makes him feel more like a believable person, who's just not, he's just not just, constantly twirling his mustache, which is fine. Again, in this genre, you can have mustache twirling villains, and I think it works totally fine. But he's such a powerful villain. I like that he's got this trajectory where all of his disciples leave him one way or another, and he's sort of really, because of his own actions, he's just alone with all this great kung fu, and he can't do anything with it. And that's like the ultimate tragedy of Reverend Jin Moon. And I feel like the final moment he gets with her, it highlights that, and it just kind of. But it's interesting because he does change it, and he's kind of, I guess, in a way, it's almost like pulling a George Lucas, like you're
a hand shot first thing, right?
Yeah, it's like a like if like I can imagine if I grew up on like the first edition or the second edition, I'd probably be royally pissed that they made such a huge change to the Jinlun character, and there's and it seems like there's a number of these little changes in the different revisions. So I don't know. I mean, it's probably not quite as bad as George Lucas, because those were usually, a lot of times those were sort of snuck in various editions, and you're like, wait a second, it wasn't always like that. And so I think these were more like,
and it's also more understandable in this sort of in the way he edited this as well, because you have to remember these are released as newspaper publications, so the chapters were just printed, and I imagine he had to keep writing these as they were being printed. So he didn't necessarily have enough time to maybe get what he wanted, and he just had to churn out the stories as as the ideas come into his head. Sort of like how you have web novels nowadays doing that. And when you're doing it on like a weekly or no, probably not daily. It's probably was a weekly printing. It leaves you limited time to put out all these interesting sort of character arcs. And it takes a lot of work to keep track of all your plot points as well, which may be why sometimes things might seem a little bit disjointed as well in the story. Like what I keep mentioning about the 5 Venom manual thing, which never came into play after it was mentioned that one time. To credit to him, he did mention it and said it was useless by that point because the poison had already been gotten into Shadow News organs or whatever. But but by the time you get around to compiling everything and reading it all through in one go, maybe that's when he realized, I could do so much better with this, and I can perfectly understand, this is his work, and he wants to make the best version of the work he can for the readers. And I can also see why people reading it would be upset that these little changes happen. But ultimately, I'd say that the writer is God in when it comes to their own work, right? So they can they should be allowed to change it however they want, and
I think too. Yeah, I think it's like you said. It's his book, and he can sort of do what he wants with it. And I think people get more upset about the changes that the shows make than the changes he's made to the story. But I don't know. I'd certainly be interested in hearing from people if anybody objects to the 3rd edition redemption arc that Jinlun gets. Weigh in. We'd certainly like to hear from you. But is there anything else this chapter that we are overlooking or not getting into?
I thought it was cool how Angor threw the stone at the end to kill him. Like he figured out all these kung fu techniques and all these all his skills, and ultimately what it came down to was chucking a rocket really hard at the car.
Well, and I like that the characters are that, and like it's to have a character that directly, a fictional character that directly commit a historical action. Do you know what I mean? Like, and again, when I looked it up, I think Monkey Khan was I think most likely died of dysentery, but he might have been killed by an arrow or something in battle. Like, it's a little bit unclear. But he basically, died in camp of dysentery, I think. But this is still within. If he was killed by an arrow, it's not that far of a leap from an arrow to a stone thrown by Yangua. But
Well, we have David and Goliath in the biblical stories, don't we? So, in this case, the massive Mongol army was defeated by the brave martial hero of the stones.
but I like how much the writer is just engaging with the history and using it freely and not feeling constrained by it. And making it still feel believable. Like they're treated like he. I just feel like he fully takes ownership of these historical characters that he's using, and it's just like, well, it's just like a character like any other. It doesn't. They don't feel different from the other characters when you're dealing with them. And
And speaking of like historical influences, like, do you think like Yang Guo, Yang Kang, and Yang Tixin were sort of based on or descended from the Yang general
yeah,
family?
no,
That,
they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be.
they actually supposed to be?
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
supposed to be descended. That's why they're named Yang, I believe. I think that they're I forget which general, but they're descended from a historical general of the Yang family. So not even
Right.
one of
Okay.
the like some of the generals are legendary or there's they're not sure, but it's a person who's like a historical Yang, I believe. And I think my amateurish interpretation has always been that that one of the characters is descended from a historical figure, one is descended from a fictional sort of legendary figure, and that's it's kind of like the coming together of myth and history and legend and history and fiction and history, and I think that's what makes one of the things that makes it so fun. Like it's not overly reverent to the history. I mean, it definitely respects the history, but like you have like historical figures kind of doing silly things occasionally, and it's fine. It makes them more believable having them do
Yeah,
the
and
dopey
sort of
things like.
like
Oh, go ahead.
another series which sort of does this is like a step to the past, or if you want to stay in like sort of Jin Yong's uh universe, like we have the Duke of Mount Deer, which is based on the eunuch's interactions with an emperor, right?
Mm.
So a lot of these sort of major events that happen are obviously based in history, but how it came about and all the characters that were involved and what their roles were in that historical event changes, and you can really sort of appreciate how much thought that he's put into it to make it all sort of work out and stitch it all together, which that's one of the reasons why I also really like his works, is because they seem believable. Like exaggerated but believable, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know what it is. It's like he does something to the character. Like I very rarely whenever I read historical fiction, I feel like most writers have a really hard time dealing with the characters. I used to read a lot of historical Roman fiction. There's like a lot of murder mysteries set in Rome, and a lot of like the I Claudius series and things like that as well, which I think is an example of really good use of historical fiction. And I think where that book is similar to the Louis Cha stuff is he's not afraid. Oops, sorry about that. He's not afraid to make a stately, austere character a little bit like your fun uncle. Do you know what I mean? Or a little bit like he's willing to turn it into a character for the purposes of the book, taking all the elements that are still true to that character, but making them a character nonetheless. And a lot of times when I'm reading something set in history, as soon as that historical figure that's important walks into the room, it's like everything changes. The whole book changes to accommodate this historical figure because we have to sort of we have to treat it as this special thing. And so it just here it's a little bit more natural feeling.
I don't know why, but I was just thinking that the first thing that came to mind was like the Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer movie that came out a while back.
No, I think it's a comparable thing because it would be like to like an American, the kinds of figures that he sort of brings into the story would be like having Abraham Lincoln or George Washington sort of show up and but in a very different seeing a very different sort of side of the character.
Yeah.
So I guess that's probably the closest equivalent we'll ever come to with the founding fathers is Abraham Lincoln vampire killer. But I do think I Claudius is a really I always mention I Claudius, but I think it's a really good example because in that Augustus is sort of treated as an avuncular kind of guy. Like he's got like he's just a very sort of interesting character, the way that he's presented in that book. And the same thing with Livia. She's this really sort of conniving, devilish character, and it's really sort of fun use of history. So, and that's sort of what I see going on here. But yeah, so I don't know. I thought this was a phenomenal chapter. This final battle is like the big moment in the book, and it really didn't disappoint me at all. So it's a I don't know, I think for me the peak scene is that formation that Huang Yaoshi is doing. That is the really impressive part of the chapter for me. But then we get like a nice epilogue with the Summit of Huashan, chapter 40. And in this one, they select 5 new greats because it's a new age and they have to choose. But also they see a bunch of people sort of enacting their own battle of Huashan, and they're not really up to the task. These are pretty pathetic heroes when measured against the 5 greats who are sort of observing this, and
it's funny why they even thought that they were worthy of being called the 5 greats. I mean, surely even like the hearing about the exploits of the previous greats would have, I don't know, like, why did they think that with their like level 1 sort of character with level 1 kung fu they can fight against people who are at level 99 already, basically?
I don't know. What were they fighting for? The title of most valiant hero, and I think the first one was for the 9 Yin manual, right? That was the first Summit of Huashan, and but this one I think it was just for a title, and then Yango just kind of uses his voice kung fu to send them off, and they flee. So they really don't turn out to be much. I think they might get one little quip in, but that was about it. And but then the more important thing happens. Then they see Yen. Well, they have this whole thing where there's a temple they go to, but after that they see Yen Keji and Xiao Shangxi fleeing from a Buddhist monk. And they overhear them talking, and apparently they're planning on killing all the monks and nuns at this temple so they can stay in hiding. And they've stolen a book from the monk, and we don't learn what this book is yet. But then the monk arrives, and I'm gonna butcher his name, but he's Ji Yuan and his disciple Junbao, who's the legendary founder of Taoism, of the was it Wudang? Is that the
Wudang, and the inventor of Tai Chi, supposedly, and became immortal at some point in his life, supposedly.
And he's the character from the Jet Li movie Tai Chi Master. So but he's just a young guy at this point. He's just and
he's a child, like he's 5 years old or something, right? I think he's.
I don't remember his exact age, but he was young.
Yeah,
he was very young.
Yeah.
But we learned that the book they stole is the 9 Yang manual, and we've been dealing with the 9 Yin manual this whole time. So now we learned there's this whole other manual that's complementary to the 9 Yin manual, and so the monk is very polite, and he doesn't try to harm Yin Keji. He just tries to sort of get them to admit that they've stolen these books, and things do sort of end up in a battle, sort of a slightly comical fight between Junbao and the two thieves, but they're not able to find the books on them, and so then the divine eagle sort of chases a green ape into the area, which seems like it was tamed by Yin Keji and Zhao Zhangxi, and they say something about the book being in oil, and everybody just lets them go for some reason, right?
No, I don't know when that line is mentioned. It might not actually be mentioned in this book at all. Actually, it's just one of those things which was mentioned in Heavenly Sword Dragon Saber.
Okay.
As to like where the book was hidden, but I don't think it was actually mentioned in this chapter.
So the way
I think what they do notice is that there was something weird about the monkey, and yeah, spoilers from Heaven Sword Dragon Saber. It's probably because they cut the monkey open and put the book inside him.
Hmm.
Um, they obviously did roll high enough on their detect checks to find that there was a wound on the monkey and suspect that there might be a secret kung fu manual hidden inside the monkey. So,
And
um, yeah,
and I guess the one of the cool things that happens in this chapter is the five new greats are chosen, and they are Reverend Yi Dang, Southern monk, Huang Yaoshi, Eastern heretic. Some of them are old greats. Gua Jing is now Northern hero. Yang Gua is Western passionate hero, and Zhu Batong becomes a central urchin. So so they got all the five great slots all now filled up, and then you learn what happened.
but who sort of spread their name? Like it's all these things. Like okay, there's only the seven of them there or whatever, right? And how are they going to spread news that there are now the new five greats?
So
And
I think if Huang Yaoshi goes and tells people that like Yangor is the Western passionate hero, people will believe him. Like I think that's
yeah.
I think it's about the credibility of the people who are saying it. Like Jerry Seinfeld gets to say who the five top comedians are sometimes. Do you know what I mean? And people will just kind of like, okay, yeah, that sounds right. So I think that's kind of how this works. Um,
I guess some of them are quite likely to go around like blabbing about it. But I see like Yang Guo not really giving a damn about his title. And Reverend Yi Deng probably wouldn't mention it, and Guo Jing either. It would really just be down to like the to Zhou Butong
and
and Huang
Chubaton could go
Yaoshi.
either way. He might have no interest in it.
Yeah, well, no, because I think they trick him into it, wanting the title by
They said they were contemplating giving it to Xiaolong Nu or Huang Rong, even though their kung fu wasn't as good as Zhu Batong's, I think. And
yeah, they sort of trick him into basically wanting the title. So I mean, you reverse psychology to him basically, and I don't know, maybe since he admits to, or since he has accepted the title, maybe we'll go around and sort of like he likes to brag about things as well. So it's not out of their own reason for him to sort of brag about being the central urchin
that's
and
true.
and then start spreading the word of the other four as well. So
That's true. I've also noticed that word tends to spread pretty quickly in this genre too. Like even if like there doesn't seem to be anybody present, somehow a rumor can easily sort of spread from without.
well, it's like the Elder Scrolls games where like if a chicken sees you killing someone, then it goes to that town guard somehow when there's gaming bugs.
I guess maybe in an age when there's a lot of servants that might just be hanging around, you can sort of justify it to a
Yeah.
degree. But like maybe there are some unmentioned servants we're not hearing about in the text. But yeah, I don't know. But I thought it was a nice closing chapter, and you get the and then obviously the remainder is to be found in Heaven Sword Dragon Saber, where we get some. We don't need to spoil it now, but we get some terrible news about the Goa family, and so yeah. So I don't know. What did you think of this chapter? Was it a good closure for you, or did you?
It was good. Like it was definitely very epilogue-y, and it was interesting there, sort of ending it with the determination of the new five greats. It was sort of like the end of the generation, end of the era, and end of the book sort of moment there. It felt kind of I don't know why he chose like all of these unknown people to sort of hold the Huashan martial tournament thing like before they showed up. Like, well, I just it's one of those things. That's really strange. Why did they think they would be the most valiant martial hero? And like,
I mean, maybe because all of the real greats were tending to this epic battle and dealing with serious issues, and so the martial world maybe had a sort of vacuum that was filled by nobodies, like,
yeah.
and then they had like a dispute over who is the best, and so, I don't know, it was comical, but it was a little bit out of left field too, so it was kind of, I wasn't sure exactly where that was coming from, but
Yeah, yeah, I did really like Zhang Zhenbao's sort of the little kid, with immense internal energy because he's been practicing the Nine Yang manual this whole time, and and it's quite cool that neither him nor Zhe Yan, Zhe Yan, Zhe Yan, Zhe Yuan, know any martial arts because they were explicit, or at least Joyanne was explicitly forbidden from learning martial arts. But Zhang Junbao was not. Like I think he just sort of little servant boy. He sort of picked up martial art, or picked up internal energies from Joyanne, and now has learned a few moves from Yang Guo now, which probably will serve him quite well in the future.
No, and also I think the monk. I mean, even though he didn't know kung fu, that Yang manual basically was like giving him a kung fu move because when somebody hit him, like it rebounded back on them. Like I think Yin Keji tries to punch him or something, and he gets thrown back. I believe I can't remember exactly
Yeah.
what happened, but so I mean, I guess
It's pretty cool as well because that sort of situation shows up in Heaven Sword Dragon
yeah,
Saber as well, and I like that it's consistent. Like what this manual does is consistent throughout the series,
yeah.
basically, and it's the same is true for the Nine Yin manual as well. Like it was consistent for it's just been all three books, so
Mm.
it's consistent throughout all three of them. And the Nine Yang manual, well, I guess it's only one chapter here, but it's also consistent with what it does across the
Well, and
series.
it's nice to see when those things come back when they've sort of reached like a legendary status. I mean, I guess they are legendary now, but they're being handled by characters that we know, and so like when they're coveted once again, I don't know. It's interesting to see where it goes in the next story, um, and yeah. So I know we're getting up on the hour mark, so what we overall thoughts of the whole book, I guess, because we're now at the end. This is the last Return of Condor Heroes episode.
I, I honestly can't decide whether like whether Return of the Condor Heroes or Heaven Sword Dragon Saber are my favorites. I'm leaning towards sort of Heaven Sword Dragon Saber just because that's sort of like, it was the first of the series I watched and that made a lasting impression on me. But there are lots of things that I really appreciate in Return of Condor Heroes, like the sort of the passionate relationship between Yang Guo and Xiaolong, the breaking of tradition, and the sort of how they deal with grudges throughout the series as well. Like, and we have like Guo Fu, who has been a bit of a bitch throughout most of the book, and then she realizes the reason she's a bitch is probably because she cared a bit more about Yang Guo than she was letting on. And that was only very briefly when she was like realizing this, and then she went back to being a bitch like the next paragraph, basically
Yeah.
as well. So,
Yeah, she had that moment where it's like, oh, she's learning, and then, well, yeah, but you know what? It was more complicated than that because she had this sudden insight into why she was behaving that way around Yangoa, and and uh um and I think it was sort of interesting, like
yeah,
she learns that she has this deep un unacknowledged affection for him, and and that's what's sort of driving so much of her behavior. And she can't even tolerate it when she uncovers it. She has to sort of go back to being, that sort of bitchy character in order to sort of shove it down. I think because I think it would have all kinds of implications for her marriage and everything. So, um,
yeah, and yeah. So I was just saying, like, there are lots of characters here who are really good. Like I, it's nice to see sort of a closure as well from the characters from Legend of the Condor Heroes. I mean, several of them redeem themselves, kind of. I mean, we Tien um, and Ouyang Feng. They
yeah.
sort of have their redemption arcs, and lots of stuff gets closed off. And I no, I definitely enjoy this series, and I'd say for anyone new to the genre, like reading this sort of trilogy of Legend, Return, and Heaven Sword Dragon Saber is definitely like a good way to get into the genre. I mean, these are classics, and we always, it's always sort of advertised as the Lord of the Rings of China or whatever. It's probably that sort of the expectation would be slightly different if it was Lord of the Rings, I'd say, but it's definitely it's probably closer to sort of like Robin Hood style stories. I don't know what the if there's like
It's
American equivalent or whatever, but
Yeah, I don't know what it would be for Americans either. I think it's a really, I guess Star Wars is probably the best American comparison because it's multi generational. It's got similar, um, sort of mystic martial arts involved.
Yeah, yeah.
It's obviously science fiction. There's huge differences. There's huge differences. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's a really hard book to give an example in. Like I think the Lord of the Rings thing comes about because people struggle for something that is close to it in terms of content, and the Lord of the Rings is like the one thing that sort of leaps to mind that seems like equally epic, equally adventure oriented, equally sort of border, sort of it gets into a type of fantasy, I suppose, but like it really is different from Lord of the Rings. And I don't know what the best point of comparison would be. I think the thing that you got to say to people is this is like a really widely known story, and it's not like
I guess we could just say that this is a genre defining story. Like when
yeah.
you say wuxia, and this is like it's not the first wuxia novel by any means, but it is the one story that you can just point to and say this encapsulates many of the wuxia tropes that that modern writers will sort of use in their stories, and it's so steeped into Chinese culture. Like Yang Guo and Xiaolong Liu is sort of used as the ideal couple in sort of popular culture, and the Nine Yin Manual, Nine Yang Manual are things that the most people know about. Like there's always like parodies of it, or there are jokes around it, and it's just one of those things where lots of people it is like both culturally important and also genre defining.
Yeah. I think it's definitely a good one to go to if you want to know what the genre can be. This is I think you can't go wrong with these stories. And I agree with you too that I kind of go back and forth between Return of Condor Heroes and Heaven Sword Dragon Saber. And I think the reason is because I think I kind of like remembering Return of Condor Heroes the most, but Heaven Sword Dragon Saber is always sort of the most fun one while I'm experiencing it. So I don't quite know how to put it aside from that. But like I'm always sort of going back and forth because they you know, they're kind of tied together. You know what I mean? Like they're all sort of connected, anyways. So I guess it's natural that there would be that tugging back and forth between them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think you can't. I think the whole trilogy is great. If you were only going to read one book, I'd say read either Return of Condor Heroes or Heaven Sword Dragon Saber, and if you were only going to read one, I don't know. I think you should read all of them if you can, but I don't know. I guess Heaven Sword Dragon Saber would be the one to read alone if you're only going to read one book, because that one you kind of don't. It stands alone a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like obviously it's connected. Like the events of this spill over in the first couple of chapters, but the bulk of the story is about Wuji, and it's a whole different. It's like so far removed from everything that's going on in Legends in Return that it can kind of stand on its own, even though the backstory is relevant. But yeah, I don't know. So I guess we'll end it here. This has been I've had a lot of fun doing this one, and I feel like people were receptive to it when we were doing it, and so maybe we'll do another one of these with another book at some point. And in the meantime, we're going to do the 14 Amazons tonight, and then we're going to do I think Shadow Whip next week. I can't quite remember. And we'll have another Lady 87 campaign up. So until then, we will talk to you later.